and welcome to the Sport for Business Daily. It's the second in our special series looking at the commemoration of Bloody Sunday, which took place almost 100 years ago in Dublin, in and around the environs of Croke Park. A man who has lived and breathed this over the last near decade is Michael Foley, Sunday Times journalist and author of The Bloodied Field, creator of the podcast of the same name. And Michael, I'm delighted to have joining us today. We're also joined by Lisa Hayden. She's the GAA Digital Content Manager, and by McDonnell from 536, the agency which has brought some of the story to life in digital form on the various channels. But I'm going to kick off with you, Michael, if I could. It's not an overstatement to say that this has dominated your life for the last decade. How does it feel now to be on the verge and with all of the attendant publicity that has come as a result of the book and the podcast and everything else? How does it feel as somebody who has taken this on as a life challenge?
Yeah, I suppose it's something that it's hard not to reflect on that over the last little while, especially the last couple of weeks, when you have so many things coming to a head, I suppose, in 1 week between the end of the podcast, the book obviously is re-released, and the documentary on as well this week. So, and to be honest with you, it's kind of a bit, it's a bit overwhelming in some regards. Like that, I actually don't know how I feel. I kind of feel that it's just been something that has been part of what I do for so long, and to see it now kind of being shared by a wider audience is obviously, it's really good. And it's, I tell you, the one thing that keeps coming to mind, particularly in the last few days, has been the sense that whatever way people look at Bloody Sunday from now on, like, and I understand, and we all know the centenary will come and it will pass and we will move on and Bloody Sunday will be there. But for anybody who revisits it at any stage in the future, that they're going to tell that story is going to be told through the medium of the victims. You know, the first people they're going to meet and the first thing they're going to meet, hopefully, will be the victims. That we managed to reframe, retell the story and put them back at the center of it. And, you know, I mean, you know, just even the contact with the families over the last little while has been kind of, it's been emotional and it's been overwhelming, really, to know that they appreciate that that's happened, you know, that kind of way. And that, you know, it means it does mean a lot to them. And I suppose that's the thing that's right now, that's the thing that I'm feeling is that sense of we've done right by the victims, or we're doing right by the victims. And that was what was at the center of this thing all the way along, all the years along. And that's coming to pass now.
And it has succeeded, because we would all have been familiar with Michael Hogan because of The Stand and everything else. And he was the one player. So naturally, the arc of the story would be focused on him. But the others, the other 13, you know, Jane Boyle, the stories of, and the kids on the wall, stories that might never have been unearthed, that might have just fallen away because we lived in a world where stories were passed on. But it was at a time in the War of Independence where stories tended to be hidden a little bit more as well, because of course then we went into the Civil War. How difficult was it to sort of sort through the dry documentation? Because I love, in the introduction to your book, you're very open, you're very honest. You say that this is based on the evidence which was presented at the time, which only became public in 1999. But you moved from that dry historical matter of fact into getting the emotional side of the victims as well. How difficult was that to actually bring people along with you?
Well, like at the time, like when I started into it in 2011, the first thing I wanted to do was just straighten the story out in almost for myself, if you know what I mean. Like the number, we didn't know how many people were killed. You couldn't be sure. You couldn't be sure of the names. The who, what, why, where, and when was, apart from knowing it happened in Croke Park and you knew the date. After that, then it was all over the place. So once that was established, and that was pretty quickly established, I can remember being in London. I remember going to the National Newspaper Library in London in 2011 or 2012 and flicking through microfilms and all the British newspapers of the time. Because like now, if you wanted to do it, you just go online and do it. But back then you had to go to London and you had to go to the library, and you know, And even then, like microfilm was like that felt like a fantastic resource, you know. So flicking through them, and I remember coming across a picture of Jerome O'Leary, and Jerome O'Leary was the first victim outside of Michael Hogan that I'd ever seen. And it was a picture of him when he was a very young boy. He was certainly younger than 10. And it was a little caption with it. And there was a picture of Jane Boyle next to him. And this was the first time. And then I found James Matthews on the same day in an English newspaper. And it was the first time that I'd seen these people. And it's no exaggeration for me to say anyway, that like the power of seeing them transformed for me what this needed to be. And suddenly it went from being a sort of a very, I wouldn't say a straightforward project, but a project of research into something much more. Like how could we grow up listening to this story, watching the movies, watching the odd documentary on it, listening to all the things we would have heard? How could we grow up with all this, thinking that this is one of the biggest things that ever happened in Irish history, in 20th century Irish history anyway? And yet we know nothing about these people. Where do these people go? You know? And like, how was it possible that these people could be forgotten in the way they were? And it didn't make me angry. It didn't make me anything. It just made me feel that this needs to change. Like, I mean, you know, what do I do? What more can I do? Only go and try and find out as much as I possibly can about them. And like, so, you know, as you say, I mean, it starts with the documents and it starts with the testimonies, but when you read them, it's between the lines. Like, it's in the little witness statements about the victims and what they had in their pockets and what they were wearing and what time they left home and who came and identified the body. And then you go back and you go look at the census and see, well, who was this person? And then you realize they had 4, 5, 6 children and the ages of the children. And suddenly you're creating this picture in your head. And then you go back. I remember going into the National Library in Dublin, and I was at Tom's Directories, you know, the old ones where you open it and you can see what was on every single street in like 1920, for example. So you can go to, Gardner Place where Michael Foley lived, and you can see, okay, well, he would have lived on that row, but what was around him? So like there was a building nearby where people who trained to work in Cleary's lived. There was a boarding house for Cleary's employees, and all these little things, you know. It was a timber merchants near one of the bars, James Tehan's bar, and suddenly you get the smell of the timber. And the fruit market was nearby, Little Britain Street, and suddenly you're building this picture in your head. So yeah, and a lot of it is done on your own, and it's done without sort of any primary sources as such, apart from these few bits and pieces. And trying to connect with the families really only happened after the book came out from 2014 on. I had connected with some of the families, but by and large, it was after 2014. And the Graves project with the GAA, which we can probably talk about later, but it from that time on, that changed the relationship even again, and you know, gave the book a different life.
They were ordinary lives, but they had an inadvertent and certainly not called for extraordinary part to play in an event that did define not only Irish history at that point, but also, and perhaps even more especially, GAA. And Lisa, the GAA has always been very good at looking forward and planning in advance, you know, which is perhaps strange in a sporting environment where we look at, you know, the final whistle of one game just leads on to the throw in of the next game, and everything is very immediate. But the GAA has got a strong sense of its own identity and its own history. Did the retelling and the reimagining of the story with all of the facts, did that pose a challenge for the association in terms of how it was going to manage, how it was going to tell this story? Because there are phrases that say, you know, that, well, it's always the legend is more important than the actual story. But now we got to know the full story. And so all of the simple, notions of what we thought about Croke Park and Hill 16 and Michael Hogan, they were kind of turned on their head a little bit. So how did the GAA both cope and manage with that and know that it had to tell this story in its own way, in a very sympathetic fashion?
I guess maybe if you think about it, like for so long, Michael Hogan was every victim. And as Michael alluded to, we didn't know necessarily the detail of all these people, but we knew there were many. and we knew they were people that went to matches. We just didn't know who they were. So I guess he, for a long time, would have represented the victims. And then when we decided to go the route of taking on our own digital video element to the commemoration, the documentary work had already started, the one that aired on Monday night, and that had started. So we knew, look, that would absolutely take care of the detail of the historic element, the Ireland of the time, the why, if you can use that phrase, why it happened, how it could have happened, etc. And Keane Murphy in the comms office was very much involved, obviously, with Michael at that stage, in the Greys project, which again had taken that step to starting to identify these people and these lives and these families. So it was a really natural step, and I feel really the right step for us to take, to start to look at these people in a very individual way, but in an individual way that really showed us that they were like us. You know, they were people that went to a match, like we all do every Sunday during the summer or winter time at the moment. They were no different. And that was a really important thing. Like, how can we tell that the extraordinary circumstances of the normality of these people? So it wasn't in any way, I would say, tricky for us. What was the most important thing is that we told their truths, we told what was right, that we didn't exaggerate. And I think the videos are a very, very good reflection of that. Like, nothing that you'll see, and like, we went to the nth degree of trying to find the right thing for each of those stories and each of the vignettes. There would have been lovely things that we potentially could have done if we had more creative license, but we made sure at the very start that we weren't giving ourselves creative license in these stories. We wanted to tell, as I said, their truths. So when we spoke about it first, I would say it was about this time last year, coming into the 1 year to go, and Dean had dropped me a mail and said, I really want to focus on the victims some more, and I think there's a great opportunity for us to do some videos. So we met, and as you do at Keane Murphy, if anybody knows, if you sit and you drink a cup of tea, and I said, look, let's tell their stories and see how they all come together, and, you know, focus on one by one a series of vignettes, and let their stories connect at the end. And that's what we did. And through releasing them, and through the, you know, I guess there's probably an element where, you know, we didn't want to go too firm and too hard into the real, you know, this is what happened when there was an invasion of our ground type territory. That's there for people to go as deep into or as shallow into as they want. But what we wanted to do was bring these people to an entirely new audience, to you know, a cohort of people who live on social media, who may or may not have heard of Bloody Sunday before, may or may not have heard of U2's song The Bloody Sunday. You know, they may just have absolutely no understanding of or knowledge of what Bloody Sunday was. So I think that by bringing these very normal stories and these normal snippets of people's lives from each of their days, I would like to think that we have, you know, garnered a totally deeper interest and a much greater, I guess, like deeper understanding, and deeper wanting to learn more, to I guess to become and to understand what these people's lives were, and that wasn't just a number or a name, that they were normal people like them who went for a pint before a game, who, you know, kissed their wives or their children goodbye, etc., and that it could have been anyone.
Yeah, there is the reading of the names and the identification of individuals, which has a very potent part to play. And we've seen that through into the modern era as well, with the victims of Hillsborough and the annual reading of the names there, which were more. But you know, it's the same idea that these are not numbers; these are individual people. And you managed to capture the story of their lives, and some of them with incredibly poignancy that you can actually see yourself, the ticket left on the tabletop, that had been forgotten on the way out the door, things that we've all done, that we've all sort of managed. When it came to the digital side of it, like it's a very big picture, and it's a very emotional picture, and it's beyond the realm of sport, where we talk about emotion, but it's perhaps on a slightly narrower level. How was the process then in terms of bringing in an outside agency like Marcus and 53.6 in order to actually express this, and what was the process that went into the selection of those that were going to come around it?
Well, I guess the video element of it was one very, very big part of it, and I guess from that stemmed also the website that we built, and that has a strong focus on the vignettes. Essentially, it stems from it. And then, of course, with the podcast, I think we were in fairly safe hands to begin with. We knew what we were getting into when we worked with Mick on that. But I guess we had worked with 53.6 before on Gaelic Sunday, and there was definitely a strong sentiment that it was the way we brought that commemoration to life again through the video that we produced, and how it was produced and how it resonated was definitely something we wanted to look at. And we went through a process, and we did speak to other agencies about delivering this, but we definitely, the concept, I think, was so important for the end result, so that we knew that it would be something that could live strongly on social. And as I said, to reach that audience that wouldn't necessarily have, I guess, engaged with a more documentary style approach in that instance online. Like, I obviously, I don't know, but I would like to think that more people tuned into the documentary last night because they had learned something from the past 8 weeks on our social channels. So it was a natural fit for us, because, as I said, we saw that was the right styling to go with, and the guys in 53.6 definitely are. They were able to deliver really well in terms of casting, and just a really strong treatment of what we wanted to achieve, bringing our idea to life, I guess.
If I can come to you, Marcus, there must have been something of a burden when this project came to you, because this wasn't marketing, this wasn't telling a nice story and using all of the right things to promote a brand or to promote an event, and sort of the more Monday to Friday kind of things that we all work with in our working lives. This is the story of 14 lives, and in some ways the story interwoven of the entire GAA's sense of itself, a sense of identity with those who make up the group we call ourselves. How heavy was that burden, or were you able to distance yourself and to look at it in terms of the functional, in terms of how we can actually make this work?
But I mean, it's funny you ask. Like, I mean, it obviously pales in comparison to what Michael has gone through over the last 8 or 9 or 10 years, and the burden that he's carried. But it reminded me in its own way. I think it was the 20th of November when we came in to present to Michael and Cian and Lisa and Clodagh at the team at the GAA in Croke Park. Now 20th of November, just the day before the 99th anniversary, and I guess I think the production was the toughest production that we've ever had as a business, and there was massive pressure and expectation purely on the basis that we wanted to do justice to the victims. But more than that, when you spoke to Cian Murphy and to Michael, you could see how much pressure and how much of a burden that they were taking. At the time, they were going through the Graves project, and it was clear to see that even from dealing with family members and relatives of the victims so many years on, where there mightn't have been a direct lineage between the victim and who they were speaking to, you could see that you know, that it had passed through generations. You know, Michael articulated it quite well, where you know, certain victims' families never attended Croke Park and actually only attended Croke Park as part of the GAA's commemorations for the first time. They just knew that it was a bad place and that, you know, bad stuff had happened there, but they mightn't have known much more. And it was, you know, there was a big kind of trickle down effect from that. So we had to get everything completely right, and then in its own way, we had to kind of creatively pull these, you know, stories together, you know, with various kind of constraints as well. So I think you may notice that there's 10 vignettes showing the stories of 14 victims. So we'd a creative obstacle of trying to interweave some of these stories together, but not diminishing any one of the victim stories as well. So it was quite tough, and I think we had the added support, obviously, from Cian and Michael, and the passion, and Lisa, of course, as well. You know, the passion that they brought to the whole project, but in its own way, they had such a passion for it that it kind of put a bit of weight of expectation onto us as well. But we partnered with some, you know, incredibly talented people who, like your question alludes to, were able to kind of put a bit of distance between, you know, themselves and what they do best and the project itself. So, you know, everyone from the art department, you know, to the locations that we sourced, you know, we worked with some incredible locations and incredibly talented people, from the stylists and the costume and the whole production throughout. I mean, you know, the directors, Grizzly, were incredibly talented filmmakers in their own right. And they, you know, they worked, you know, hand in hand with Michael to be able to kind of creatively interweave the various stories and then to create the film as well. So we kind of, we buttressed like our support and the pressure we were feeling by bringing in really good people around us, and then, you know, relying on the unit of Cian and Michael and Lisa as well to kind of to make sure that we could see it through. But it was tough. It was certainly a tough production, and you know, it was kind of crazy how it happened as well. The you know, we filmed the 9th, 10th, 11th of March, and then we actually got an additional pickup day. So we shot some extra scenes down in Monasterevin. We found a replica Sleeve Mannon vehicle, which would have, you know, been the same type of vehicle that had driven towards Croke Park with the auxiliaries. And there was a guy down in Monasterevin who kind of he's a military history enthusiast, I guess, for want of a better description. So we ended up shooting with him on Thursday morning, so Thursday the 12th. And we shut the door on our car and like headed back towards Dublin. And the moment we turned the ignition on, the radio came on, and it was Leo making his speech saying that the country was going into lockdown. So we were then in post for what we thought was going to be 3 weeks, but it almost took about 3 months because we had to kind of figure it out remotely. It was kind of crazy, and we had to kind of edit remotely. There was no point where we sat in a room with our directors or the editor or the producers or Michael or any of the GAA together to kind of go through things. Everything was done remotely, so that kind of brought its own challenges as well. But we're immensely proud of, you know, the small part that we've played in amongst, you know, all of the incredible things that Michael and the GAA have been doing. You know, the past year, the past week, it's been a real eye opener.
Can I come back to you, Michael? Your role almost as the equivalent of a playwright, that you kind of had to mind these characters who were obviously real people with real stories, but you had created them in the sense of the history of it. Can you remember any of the detail about how you might have suggested that one character might have done this, that, or the other in terms of the filming?
Nothing in particular comes to mind. Like I know that I would say it was probably, and I listen to Marcus, I can imagine it was probably really difficult because I suppose the degree of work that's gone into the book and the rest of it, I'm a bit of a pain about it, to be honest. I can be a bit of a pain about it. And there's a fine line between being rigorous about something and, you know, determined to have it in a particular way, and just being a pain. So, and I'm acutely aware of that. And I'm also aware that, you know, there are things that I can do and there are things that I'll back myself to do, but there are also things that I don't know how to do, or that I know there are people much better than me at doing them and framing them and imagining them. And, you know, being involved with Marcus and Lisa and the lads on the vignettes, and also been involved in the longer form, the TV documentary, has been a really interesting process from that regard, you know. I went in with my eyes wide open. I knew that, you know, what I wanted to see on the screen, or what I might like to see on the screen, that's not my bag. Like, I'm here, and I would have been there to guide them along. And absolutely, there was probably bits and pieces. Marcus can probably remember better than me. I'm sure there was bits where they were going, "Ah, jeez, what's this guy on about?" But what I really respected, and when I look at the short films now, there are little moments in it. It's like looking at an album cover, a really complex album cover that has little hidden meanings in it. So, for example, there's one of them has Tom Hogan and James Tehan together in a bar. I do remember, actually, there was a conversation about the drink. I remember there was, I think I raised an issue about the color of the drink.
Yeah.
That Tom Hogan would have been drinking. That was one thing, all right. But the two lads are in the bar, and I again, Mark might remember this better, but we had a conversation on what are they going to be doing? How can we put them together in this in a way that makes sense? And in the conclusion of it all, it was that James Tehan that Tom Hogan would forget his jacket and James Tehan would give him the jacket. Now, the significance of that is that when Tom Hogan was killed in Croke Park, his family got his jacket back, cleaned it, sewed up the hole where the bullet went through, and kept it for 100 years. So that was, you know, there's a thing. There was a piece with Patrick O'Dowd and James Matthews. Again, we're trying to figure out, they were kind of roughly on the same side of the ground, but they probably weren't that close together. So how do you make this make sense? And as I say, make sense to me, because obviously the rest of the world is like, you know, what, you know? So in that one, you have James Matthews struggling through the crowd, and Patrick O'Dowd puts his hands down to lift him up because he stumbles. And the significance there is that Patrick O'Dowd, the last thing he did before he was killed, he was helping people over the wall. He was lifting them over the wall. So, you know, I really appreciated the sensitivity that the lads brought to ideas like that. And as I was saying, you know, they could have done so much more with them. And I'm sure there was times where it was frustrating where they couldn't. But, you know, I think that the integrity of the whole thing, we had to try and stay as close as we could to the reality, to what we know about the reality of what happened to these people and the kind of people they were and what was going on in their lives. So yeah, I'm sure I was very pedantic about things, and probably very difficult, but you know,
and rightly so, rightly pedantic as well.
Yeah, I can remember that meeting. I remember the meeting when you came in, and I remember Cian talking and we talking. It was actually very emotional. I would think we were all pretty emotional that day when we were kind of talking about what we were doing and what this would mean, you know. And like, I've come across, particularly even just recently, I've come across scenarios where you'll see people who they see Bloody Sunday as an opportunity, right? They can see the price of it, but they don't see the value of it. And I mean, for me, down the years, as you know, it's always been about it's been about the families, and it's been about the victims. And I mean, you know, working with the GAA over the past few years, and look, I'm a GAA journalist for donkey's years. I've spent most of those years giving out about them, but I can safely say that, you know, I recognized that they recognized what this was about. And in fairness to Marcus and the lads, once they got involved in the project and got invested, they got invested. I think it's fair to say they got invested in it, and they felt it far beyond a job of work. That's certainly what it felt like to me. I mean, the thing about Bloody Sunday, and I can say it for myself, I'd say anybody that I've worked with or helped out or whatever on this in big projects, Bloody Sunday it knocks hell out of you. It's such a huge, because you realize very quickly when you go into it, this is huge. you know. And what's huge about it, it's not the political or the historical significance of it, it's the responsibility you bear to the families and to the victims themselves. That's maybe burden's the wrong word, but that's it. And I'm not complaining, I'm not giving out about that, but that's just the reality of what it feels like to me. And I've seen it in other people that I've worked with on Bloody Sunday related stuff. My own brother doing the podcast, like I'd say the man needs to go on holiday. But you know, this is what it is, you know.
There was an element, I think, as well, like I certainly came to it later than Michael and Keen, but and their enthusiasm, and again, certain words don't feel right using in the context, but their passion and their will to impart knowledge and the detail upon others is absolutely infectious, and it's into my soul at this stage. But you really feel they are, you know, the families are there, but on a day-to-day basis, that Keen and Michael are who these victims have to represent them in so many instances now. And you know, for every moment of let's tweak that slightly, or let's not go that far with this, or let's not bring in, for instance, a radio as a prop, or you know, something small like that, that it's just doing justice to the moment, and it's just doing what's right by those people. And I think that, yeah, I was absolutely there for the moments where I'm sure we did drive Marcus to the brink, but I really feel as though it was for the right reasons, because, as I said, the passion that Michael has, like there's part of me that's sad that this is going to end in a way come Saturday, because I could listen to him all day and all night. 8 episodes of a podcast isn't enough.
Yeah,
but
I don't know. I think there'll be plenty of people glad to take a break from me now. I think it's at the end of this week.
No, but
the beauty of it is, though, perhaps it actually won't end now.
Yeah.
No.
The work which has gone into this. I mean, history. I studied history, and it's long been a passion of mine. And they say that journalism is the first draft, but this is a really important, not maybe final draft, but certainly the definitive draft of the history of this really important moment. And you have done it incredible justice. In the digital sense, have the GAA and have 53.6 and have everybody else involved in the project, have we managed to get that through to the next generation of social media folk? I dread to compare the viewing figures of Bloody Sunday on Monday night to I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, the sort of, perhaps the more vacuous sense of popular culture, but not to demean it in any way. This is something which lasts the test of time. Have we gotten through by all of these different channels to that next generation? Will they have a better understanding, a deeper understanding, and a greater appreciation of what it means to walk through the gates of Croke Park in years to come?
I'd certainly like to think so. Look, we've bombarded them with it for the last few months. And again, like I think one thing we probably haven't touched on is the rollout of this isn't exactly how we had planned, because of the fact that we're in a pandemic. We wanted to do it slightly differently. We in terms of how we released the vignettes. Obviously the importance of match day was going to be very much central to that, on our screens in stadium and stadia around the country, and we weren't able to go that direction. So I think that with the parameters that we had, where it all had to very much just live on social channels and was reliant on our kind of take and fast schedule of getting these pieces out, I would like to think, as I said at the start, that we have a new community of people who have an interest, and maybe some have a greater interest, a much greater interest than they started with, and some people will just recognize these faces. And I think we saw that with the stats and the cumulative views over the week. It started to piece together for people. So when we released Jane Boyle at the start, the poignancy of that maybe at that time wasn't as great as when we got further down the tracks and we started to release one week after week, and people started to say, oh, this is something, this is related to what they posted last week. I get this now. So for those who didn't know the story, that's how it would have pieced together for them. And we can see that trend for sure. And then how, you know, at the same time we started to release more of the bios on the website, and as the podcast came then as well, and kind of it really created this full 360 holistic experience for you to delve as deep, or as I said before, you can go in as deep as you want with this, and you can go in up to the point where you can't breathe anymore. But you can also dip your toe in. You can learn a little bit, and maybe, I don't know if they still do special topics in history anymore, but maybe it'll be a lot more history special topics in future years. And we've had some really interesting correspondence from parents. Actually, one had pointed out something to me one day. She said, my child is making a book on it, and he's drawing the victims as he goes along, as they're released each week, and writing their stories, and just things like that. And you're like, wow, that's a little kid who couldn't write his own email, but he's getting involved in this. And for that alone, for a few more people even to feel more connected with what happened that day in Croke Park, the next time they walk into the styles in Croke Park, or any pitch around the country, because as we say, it wasn't just an attack on Croke Park, it was the GA, it was our people. So I think for us to be able to know that we've gotten there with more people is definitely, again, to use a crude word, but success.
There is a lovely continuity to the fact that child may, in 50 years' time, find those pictures and show them to their own grandchildren.
Maybe.
We may or may not be around to play witness to that, but you have played witness to history. It was a couple of minutes of violent madness back in 1920. It's been 100 years hidden, and I think, Michael, in particular, what you've done to actually bring it back to life and bring it to a new generation is something for which you can be immensely proud. The Limerick Leader, I think, at the time of your book, wrote that it was the most important Irish sports book ever. Big words, but
Here.
Build them well. To Marcus for creating those wonderful images of and the music, the whole sense of it, being something that was relevant today, looking back on the way it was 100 years ago. And Lisa and the whole of the GAA for being, in a sense, brave enough to recognize it and to bring it out. It might have been easier to just say, well, look, we've got a lot of games to organize in 2020 and we'll just carry on. But you didn't. And I think that you have done it incredibly good justice. We're going to play out with one of the short vignettes that we've been talking about. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here for this short period of time and to reflect upon the work. So to Marcus McDonnell, to Michael Foley, and to Lisa Hayden, thank you very, very much.